Good to go.
So hi, everybody. Welcome. This is Steve Cady here at Bowling Green State University and our Schmidt-Horst College of Business and our doctorate in Organization Development and Change. And this is a part of our ODNC, Organization Development and Change Symposia series. And we are showcasing all kinds of great people, particularly our doctoral students and the work that they're doing along with other thought leaders that are partners and speakers and engaged with our program. We have a few things that I want to tell you about our ODNC program, and we have two. We have a doctorate in organization development and change, and we have a master in organization development and change. These both programs are in the College of Business. They're AACSB accredited and Higher Learning Commission accredited. And our focus for the doctorate program is on really this notion in the upper left-hand side here, you can see in the professional joy notion there, is that people achieve professional joy through thought leadership. And our program helps people to expand on their professional career opportunities by managing, consulting, teaching, and even researching when they want, where they want, with whom they want, making the living they want. And that is grounded in this notion of thought leadership, which is really important. And David, you are one of our stars in that regard, and our students are all stepping into this in our program, really showcasing their knowledge, their thought leadership through creating content. I talk about scalable content. I talk about it in terms of making a difference while you sleep. People talk about passive income. I talk about passive difference making, which is sharing your ideas, your thought leadership in ways that help others all around the world in your industry and so forth. And our program focuses on that. And it really emphasizes what you are passionate about. And when we get into our talk today, we're going to share with you David and what he's passionate about. And our purpose is to bring evidence-based perspectives to people who are transforming organizations, revitalizing communities, and developing human potential. And at the center of that, in that little Venn diagram you see there, is this notion that we bring our thought leadership out into popular press, into professional settings, into academic arenas, truly bringing that scholar practitioner perspective to all the work that we do in transforming those organizations, revitalizing communities, and developing human potential. And our agenda today is going to touch base on what we're here for, which we're doing right now. David's going to give a keynote speech for us. He's going to talk about his topic area and share it with us. We're going to have an opportunity to go into small groups and reflect on the experience and a whole room Q&A. And we'll wrap up with a reflection on the whole experience for the day today. And then we'll talk about our next sessions and the symposia that we have in the future. We have some really cool ones coming up. And I'll say more about that at the end. So, and now I'd like to introduce you to David. And David is a management consultant, executive coach with expertise in advancing entrepreneurial thinking, innovation, leadership, deepening social impact and engagement, and strengthening operational performance. And I really think that I like your motto, Dave. David, I like the motto that David brings to all that he does, which is, his motto is perspective defines happiness. A positive attitude enables success, and possibilities exist for most anything. And you can see that essence in what he's going to talk about today. And it's how society's changing attitudes affect nonprofit culture. So David, thank you. As a part of our doctoral program, as a part of cohort 1, you've already been published and more than once now, and you're bringing your professional brand out in the world as a thought leader. So I'm really excited for you to share your good work that you're doing. So I'll turn it over to you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and David, you can share yours and take it away.
Right. Thank you all. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces from my class and from aspects of my life. And, thanks for everyone for coming out and supporting this work. So many of us who have a passion for the work in the social sector are driven by an underlying personal mission to have impact on the world. The work is not just what we do, it's foundational part of who we are as human beings. Some of us come to this work because we have this innate design to help others, and others of us find that we are informed, shaped, and inspired by the world around us. The work is about who we are alone and who we become when we work together. So one definition of this work is an uncoerced collective action around shared interests, purposes, and values. And this is what serves to guide a nonprofit's formation and define the actions of volunteers in support of community needs. So think of it this way. What's important to me and what's important to us become how we build and sustain civil society. And these are the things we'll be talking about today. So the best way to understand it is to start at the beginning. There we go. The social consequences of the American Revolution, America's Industrial Revolution set the stage for the formation of a modern day perspectives of civic responsibility and volunteerism. People flocked to the cities for higher pay, but encountered poor working and living conditions that struggled to provide for their families. So the growing progressive movement at the time, at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, argued that government had a responsibility to lead social reform, but charitable entities had the practical responsibility for engagement and the grassroots movement necessary to facilitate that reform. So many charitable organizations formed around the 20th century focused on humanitarian aid and the promotion of dignity and equal rights and the protection of children and youth and the promotion of citizenship education. You probably recognize some of these big names. They are the American Red Cross, the Boy Scouts of America, the Child Welfare League, Federated Boys Club, which is now the Boys and Girls Club of America, the Girl Scouts of the United States of America, the NAACP, and the National Urban League. The forming a charitable organization was a difficult thing to do. So you needed to have a certain standing in the community at those times to make that happen. So some researchers suggest that forming, leading, and participating in nonprofit organizations has historically reinforced society's distinctions, that's being race, gender, religion, and national origin. And this is important because it sets in motion the idea that nonprofit organizations are shaped by the social concerns that they are formed to address and by society's context at the time of their formation. Collectively, we call that value the mission. Now, volunteers of nonprofits often engage because their values align with the organization's mission. This alignment is vital because it lends significance to the volunteers' altruism while providing the nonprofit with a foundation for a cohesive culture necessary to fulfill its purpose and mission. But over time, though, changes in society's attitudes brought about a transference of generational leadership, and that may lead to an evolution of individual values, which in turn may shift the social construct. So we have all this change going on, but the mission of nonprofit organizations, that certain set of values that are core to the organization that were created at the time of their formation, become fixed. So Karl Mannheim had this theory of generations that he put forth in the 30s, I believe, and he proposes that each new generation's values and attitudes are shaped more by the society and culture in which they live during their formative years and less by their parents' direct actions. So think about these generations that are currently living now. We have the silent generation, which was influenced by World War II, Korea, the birth of rock and roll, the baby boom, which was influenced by the JFK assassination, the lunar landing, Vietnam, Watergate, Woodstock. We have Generation X, which became our first latchkey kids. They are influenced by this major recession that took moms back to work, the fall of the Berlin Wall, Challenger disaster. Generation Y, which is commonly known as millennials. Well, we're about video games and the internet and the rise of social media. Gen Z was a formative action was September 11th, the Obama election, and the advent of mobile technology. And Gen Alpha, which is our current generation up and coming, are going to be defined by COVID-19. So you can think about this in terms of your own experiences. How are you defined in part by the world in which you live at the time that you were becoming an adult? So with each new generations, the needs, values, and expectations and attitudes of individuals toward culture and social change also evolve. The change in individual values and attitudes appear to reshape the social construct. It informs workplace dynamics and affects the nature of individual volunteerism. So the collective action of new generations change in response to society's evolution and influence of civil society. This continuing evolution of society changes how individuals perceive the importance of social issues and how they are relative to their lives. So when younger generations take a more prominent place in leadership, their opinions and beliefs spill into all aspects of their lives, their personal relationships, their work, their civic and social engagements, and that includes volunteerism and philanthropy. So when we think about the role of volunteers and the role that they play in serving society's needs through their engagement with nonprofits, it's important to acknowledge how the transference of generational power may shape a nonprofit's culture and its operations. So as we know, nonprofits exist to address the social and cultural issues of society. However, most nonprofits are really corporations that aren't designed to make a profit, right? They're really what we would now call social profit organizations, and their profit is the impact that they have on society. So if a nonprofit is actually a corporation in terms of its operational functions, it makes them just as susceptible as for-profit counterparts to the shifts and attitudes of society that are brought by new generational leadership. So this changing perspective of volunteers and donors and sponsors and even staff may make nonprofits more sensitive than the for-profit counterparts, because they need to be able to sustain financial commitments to support their mission and operation. So any one little misalignment there can be problematic for a nonprofit, but nobody's really talking about this. So all the research on generational change in the social sector is limited to how generations give and maybe their level of volunteerism. It's a focus on the attitudes of younger generations and their proclivity for giving and involvement, but it doesn't address the implications of generational values on these attitudes. So based on my research, I argue that values congruence, the alignment between the individual and the organizational values, that's the mission, is likely to be the most critical problem facing nonprofits in the world today. And most organizations are unaware, largely because of the limiting factors of their culture. So what drives people to volunteer? So one researcher, Clary, et al. Suggests that there are 6 drivers behind volunteer motivations. One is values, which is satisfying this altruistic or humanitarian needs. Another is understanding, satisfying opportunity to learn. Social, satisfying a need to build or extend relationships. Career, satisfying a desire to improve or enhance career prospects. Protective, satisfying ego-centered needs. Enhancement, satisfying the desire for personal growth or self-esteem. So a volunteer may be motivated by any one or more of these drivers, and nonprofits would probably see varying levels of each. Now, this is important because the most successful nonprofits also build a culture around shared values and goals. They rely heavily on the cultural elements to fulfill their missions and attract volunteers. And they often socialize their volunteers and donors toward those shared values and goals. Changes brought by evolving attitudes and perspectives on social issues influence volunteers differently based on how those changes align with their motivations and the subsequent support of a nonprofit's response to the same external forces. So if values are a motivating driver, when an organization culture evolves, that evolution is rooted in changes in society's attitudes that may not align with the volunteer's values. A volunteer may become disenchanted. A basic set of assumptions that's likely to guide an organization's culture and its behavior soon cease to exist for the individual when these misalignment of the values occur. So the discrepancy between organizational values and assumptions and its volunteers' values and assumptions is an essential consideration for nonprofits whose core values are rooted in and informed by society's early 20th century attitudes. So despite socialization to common organizational beliefs and practices today, the culture and values are not likely to be defined consistently between generations of volunteers. I want to give you an illustrative case looking at the Boy Scouts of America. So Edgar Schein, who is a noted researcher in culture, suggests that culture manifests itself in three ways: as observable artifacts, values, and basic underlying assumptions. So over time, these three elements of culture represent an understanding that automates the responses and behaviors and forms and shapes its learning and approaches. So when combined, these cultural elements provide cohesion for the organization and align goals and objectives for operational success. So as an organization highly dependent on volunteers to deliver the programmatic aspects of its mission, the scouting program, cultural cohesion, as you might imagine, is central to the BSA's success. And Schein also argues that values take on the character of assumptions over time, which are less open to discussion within the organizational culture. So for more than 100 years, the BSA has remained true to the core values of the Scout Oath and the Scout Law that it put forth. They not only have meaning in current and past participants, but they're prevalent in popular culture. The interpretations then take on a life of their own and give many different meanings to the organization's aspirational context without reflecting its true reality. Moreover, when interpretations of meaning are made, the BSA may find itself informed and shaped by culture and mission more so than the reality of the society it serves. So artifacts also establish the cultural norms for adult volunteers and serve as a foundation for volunteer recruit socialization. Creating norms at the outset, the organization is able to attract individuals who already possess the characteristics that it values. So it may be important for the organization to have volunteer traits that align with its preferences from the outset so that it creates a greater commitment to its mission. The alignment, though, may lead to what we would call cultural homogeneity. That's a tough word for me, and limit its diversity within the volunteer membership basis. So while its artifacts are important outward representation of the BSA, its longstanding espoused values may have the greatest influence on its culture and its volunteer involvement, so as well as on modern society's perception of the organization. This is just one illustrative case of how changes in society and attitudes driven by generational leadership shifts can affect a nonprofit's culture and its ability to change. Another thing to remember about the Boy Scouts is that it has a long legal history of defending its culture. In fact, there are numerous public instances of value misalignment between volunteers and organization when it moved to accept openly gay youth, gay and lesbian leaders, transgender youth, and more recently, girls into the Boy Scouting program. Except for some of the very early attempts at proactively integrating troops, the BSA's membership policy evolution does not appear to be driven by internal factors. It seems that external factors, those are changes in national culture and society's attitudes toward race and gender, motivated the segment of the organization's volunteers to act on their values. So it appears that the collective action of volunteers forced the organization's leadership to implement a new policy that more closely aligned with society's attitudes, and in doing so, began to shift its organizational culture. Now, the BSA probably realized that the society's changing attitudes would affect its relevance over time. So as this volunteer base changed, these changes were essential to the organization to sustain its social impact. The shifts in society's attitudes can clarify nonprofits' values and give voice to volunteers who desire greater inclusion within the organizational culture. But the same shifts can alienate volunteers who perceive that their personal values no longer align with the organization. So it may be that a volunteer assesses the values of a nonprofit and their individual alignment with those values in the context of their initial social engagement. So when did they connect and what were the values then? So when the values change, either an individual's values or the organization's, it creates this misalignment. It's also important to note that the missions are typically written broadly and are open to interpretation. So this should cause some concern for nonprofits because it would suggest that volunteer perceptions of nonprofit values may be subjective. So the question is, what do you do with all this information, right? Well, simply put, don't become a cultural island. But it's not that easy, is it? So established nonprofit organizations have the most difficulty facilitating change brought on by shifts in society's attitudes because they have not actively considered nor explored the effect of such changes on their organization. Nonprofits are likely to use systems, processes, and procedures to maximize their ability to deliver their missions with constrained financial means and a limited paid staff. These organizational systems often operate with the assumption that needs, values, and expectations of their constituencies, in large part, will not change over time. So let's get a little deeper. The things that you should be thinking about here: don't assume continuity. If your mission has remained substantially the same for more than a couple of decades, it's likely your organization's operating systems, processes, and procedures for delivery on that mission were, and perhaps still are, seemingly built on an assumption of continuity for your constituency. Society has changed, maybe not a lot, but enough for you to think about revisiting how you do what you do. It's not that you change your mission, it's that you think differently about how you deliver it. And at the very least, consider how society's changing attitudes might influence and inform your volunteers, your donors, your sponsors, and others that you serve. Remember that your organization is an open system. An organization's culture is not defined only by those who work within the walls. It's informed by people, social norms, outside technology, and other things that force the evolution of expectations of its constituents. Even so, a lack of diversity within an organization makes it difficult for leadership to quickly understand how external factors may inform and influence the culture. Cultural lock-in, which is the inability to change culture even when threats appear, occurs when within an organization when its invisible architecture and mental models inhibit active and responsible decision-making. Consider convergent thinking practice, or basically put, get out of the box. Shifting attitudes stemming in part from changes in generational leadership is how society and national culture evolve. Nonprofit organizations have less resilience with these changes. Misalignment between an organization's mission and changing attitudes in society is likely to impact its economic support and have possible repercussions on its volunteer base. Established nonprofit leadership may often rely too heavily on convergent thinking practices and are not likely to be considering the full implications of the changing social attitudes within their organization. Scan for the possibility of threats. Evaluating an organization's leadership, culture, and climate without considering the factors that might inform those issues may not sufficiently improve the operations. This may cause nonprofits more difficulty as they are not likely to be as focused on the changing marketplace and the implications to the performance as a for-profit organization. The increasing probability of external impacts on the nonprofit and its culture stemming from generational leadership will likely influence ongoing sustainability of the organization. Actively look for systemic cultural roots to performance problems. Too often we look at things like revenue shortfalls and staff turnover and volunteer disengagement or membership declines as transactional elements that are independent of the whole system. Repeatedly responding to these transactional elements doesn't solve the root problem and results in perpetually moving the deck chairs, as a former supervisor used to say. It's indicative of a cultural lock-in issue for the organization. For maximum impact, you have to evaluate the culture, incorporating all points of view, volunteers, members, donors, sponsors, and employees, and then develop a plan to create a collaborative and sustainable change within the organization's culture. Finally, it's create and empower cultural diversity. Leaders and managers should work to identify cultural differences and the constituent expectations of their fellow volunteers, co-workers, and partner organizations. These might be in the form of incentives along with constituent contributions to the organization. Cultural diversity is paramount in this work, while identifying differences is vital when viewed through the lens of societal change brought by shifting leadership. New ideas should emerge to enable leadership to mitigate values misalignment with volunteers and build a more robust and sustainable organizational culture. So changing attitudes and culture in society inform new generations, and generational leadership changes facilitate new perspectives in social and culture and society. Society's views are ever evolving, as we know, and volunteers are led by and respond to changes in these attitudes, particularly when these changes align or misalign with their individual values. This is particularly troublesome in the nonprofit sector, where the impact of societal changes on volunteers may also influence the financial and operational support. Nonprofit leadership cannot presume continuity exists among its constituents. Leaders should consider focusing on external inputs, that's changes in attitudes in society, for one, as a primary guide for ongoing success. Monitoring these inputs, leaders can determine how best to refine or redefine leadership approaches, culture, and operations to achieve its mission goals and sustain and increase its social impact. In the book, Helping People Change, there's a phrase that stands out to me as a driver for all of this work. Better me, better you, better us. Working together, we can all do something great. And now I'll open up for questions or a conclusion.
So what we're going to do is we're going to stir up the pot a little bit to create some good questions for you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go into small groups, and I'm going to ask you all to reflect on what you heard David share with you. And what did you hear? And what are your reactions to what you heard? And what questions of understanding do you have? So we're going to open up some breakout rooms. You're going to be invited into a breakout room with 3 other people. There'll be groups of 4. Take about 10 minutes. Have a nice conversation. Get to know some new people. Say hi to old friends. And reflect on what you heard today. And I'll send these questions out to you in the chat. Essentially, what did you hear? What are your reactions? And what questions of understanding do you have for David? We'll come back and check in and see where you all come up with. So we'll take about 10 minutes to do that. As part of the recording, we're going to jump around. So Doug, if as you are continuing, you want to go ahead, it's okay to go to a breakout room and sit in with them and have that recording and bring it back so that we kind of keep the continuity and with the people that will be watching this later. So why don't we go ahead and jump into some breakout rooms and have a conversation.
All right, I'm opening them up now.
So you gotta, oh, hold on a second. So you're having, okay. So if we could, Doug, if you could close it,
Okay.
and then you wanna, I'm gonna recreate, hold on a second here. I'm gonna take care of it from here.
Okay.
Let 8 sign automatically. Create all the rooms. Okay, there we go. All right, now I'm gonna open, you're gonna see the rooms all open. And you're going to be invited to a room. So why don't you go ahead and see who your mystery friends are, because it's a random assignment. Okay. So David Perry, if you want to join room 6, and let's see here. There we go.
There we go. I forgot to hit the click. Oh, I'm going to pause here.
Right, they're not learning anything anyway. Oh, no, just joking. You could probably teach them more at home, right?
Yeah, he gets his mommy, I slide in different assignments.
Understood. Hey, Doug.
Hi, Doug.
Hello, everyone. I'm just popping in, capturing you all. I knew there'd be some dynamic conversations here with this crew, so
I don't know about this crew, but you put me in here. I'm just going to sit and listen to them then. All good.
actually I've been asked, I'm going to hop over to room 6 because they're asking a question. So I
All right, cool.
might be back. All right.
All right, cool. Thanks. Doug.
Hello, Doug, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, good. I couldn't hear Minda, so
Oh,
I'm trying to see if I can help her. Let's see. Oh, okay. She can hear us, I think, but I can't hear her. Maybe you can, but
I cannot. No.
Minda, we can't hear you, but we see a big white M on a blue background. It's very pleasing.
I'm going to mute and unmute you, and we'll see if that helps.
Okay.
All right. And now I'm asking to unmute. So Minda, we'll see if that gives you an opportunity to.
Maybe. Hello.
It could be your audio settings on whatever device you're using, just choosing to
Change them.
go with the whatever the device settings are. They're built in.
What did you hear? What did you write?
Well, if you like,
Okay.
I can assign you both to another breakout room. That at least Minda will get to have some more conversation that way, if that works. And hang on, let me
Whatever works.
do that here. All right. And,
guidelines on, approaching this from that nonprofit perspective, which is very, very interesting, considering where, older generations have been, and how to get in the newer generations to get involved, and not just looking at, okay, this is where it is. No, because you want your nonprofit organization to carry on long after this generation is off, right? Megan, you will want that for your program, that it continues on. So, and that's just my takeaway, to basically bring in different generations, and not just for nonprofit, but every area, that you find yourself in, just gathering all, into that kind of system. That's my takeaway from his presentation.
Welcome, Doug.
hello, I thought I would pop in here, just see how y'all are doing and capture some great conversation, I'm sure. So
Thank you. Well, I'm going to go since there's some time. First of all, I think David has done an unbelievable job of integrating theory and practice based on his experience. Now he's got a model for why he's had the experience he's had, and he's put it into very understandable terms. And for that, I give him unbelievable credit, and it's a contribution. On a personal level, my mind was going a mile a minute, because in my early life, I did a lot of volunteer work and went from being a very behind the scenes local volunteer to being chairman of the board of a local piece of a national organization. And I had been involved in the national organization. And because of the lack of funding, my group was fired. And to be fired from a not-profit is quite an experience. And so I could write a case study of all the things that David was talking about, using that as a lens, and I completely forgot about it. And it was that our group was younger and it was recording for the blind. And the social impact was that blindness, because of medical reasons, had decreased to the point where that wasn't a valid constituency anymore. But the product was very useful if you expanded to students in the dyslexic and learning disabled community. And that's what we wanted to do. And the old board said, no, 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 no. We only deal with physically blind. So that's the context. And I found it really interesting because I knew all those things that David speaks about. Open systems is where my dissertation work is. But I don't think I could have put the model together with this example. And having started a nonprofit, a very little one, in order to improve communities with schools, I am so aware of the issue of volunteerism versus making money and structure. And I'm so impressed, Megan, that you're coming from that at the get-go, as opposed to after the fact, when it's much harder to retrofit. My last comment is we are so positioned with change methods to do intergenerational work. And that's the message, that the silos for me have an opportunity to be broken. And how do we use things like conversational leadership, World Cafe, open space, things that are in our lane to encourage intergenerational conversation? And we're better than parents, schools, and athletes. I think you're in a model situation and you need another thing on your plate, Megan. But if you document this, this would be a wonderful study because you've got it from the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just looking forward to, I was thinking to myself, we talk about one more thing on the plate. I said, it's going to be so strange this summer to have one class, just one at a time. But yeah, what's amazing is, the startup of this youth organization, which again is not me alone. I've got great board members, I've got great volunteer coaches. It's getting this whole new excitement going in the area. There's been sort of a change in a lot of people that have been involved with it for a while. They got stagnant, for a long time. So
welcome back, everybody. And we've got these 3 questions to discuss. So let's jump into some questions. David, are you there? I'm looking for you. See you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And so you can raise your hand. Somebody can even unmute, just jump right in. So who has a question that they would like to share? Maybe summarize a little bit about what your group discussed and then to preface it and then give us your question. Who would like to jump in with a question for David?
I'll ask a question, Steve.
Sure. That'd be great. Yeah.
So I've known David for a long time, but I never asked him this question. And was there a seminal moment in your involvement with the Boy Scouts where you thought, a change is afoot? There's maybe not a tidal wave, but clouds forming around sort of the cultural development and some changes that would need to go on to adapt to cultural changes, but internally, because you were a part of that organization internally. So I just wondered if there was clear signs or it was, a slow build, or what are your thoughts on that? So I'll put myself on mute.
yes and no. Like when you're in the culture, you don't see the things, right? Even at the level I was at, you don't see the things. I did um, I did think that when there was a move to accept um, openly gay youth, that was a pivotal moment for the organization. And if you understand how an organization like the Boy Scouts or other large nonprofits work, that was months of negotiation with partners. Months. So anything that's announced in public like that, it is really all kinds of work is being done behind the scenes to make sure that that happens. But it was just a matter of time. So if you look at, and I did a chart on this and I should have shown it. If you look at the impact of legislative decisions of society's changes and the Boy Scouts responses to those changes, in the early part, if you did a timeline, there's huge gaps between legislative changes, Boy Scout change, legislative change, Boy Scout change. And then when you started getting into the 90s, 80s and 90s, the gap got really small. So the organization was beginning to realize, oh, we have a relevancy issue, among other things. We have a relevancy issue and we've got to address it. And not everybody's going to be happy with this, but we're letting people define us and define our culture. And that's not something that is acceptable to us. So the last few changes happened within a few years. The acceptance of transgender youth and the migration to scouting from the Boy Scout troops to scouting, integrated scouting troops, happened within just a few years of each other. And the other important thing to mention there is everywhere else in the world, scouting is co-ed. In the United States, it's not. So it's a really interesting dilemma. And when you think about that in the context of the organization's cultures and how they function and operate around the world versus how we function and operate with the separation of the United States, it's telling. It's really telling.
Maybe the Girl Scouts don't want to share their cookie revenue. I don't know. That's just.
Yeah, I've done work for those guys too, so I can't really talk too much about that. But yeah, it's always a challenge. There's always tension between the organizations.
Looks like we have a
Thanks, thanks, David. Good question. So Angie has a question. Angie, do you want to unmute and jump in?
Hi.
Hi.
First, I just want to say hi to everybody that I can't wait to see on Friday at our makeup graduation. David, I'm from the 2020 EMOD class. My whole career has been either personally actively volunteering sort of to change the world, or actually working as a professional fundraiser and now as a consultant. And what Gary and I talked about in our breakout room was about kind of our shared interests in working with youth from urban areas. And so what we ended up talking about was whether you had sort of factored in the possibly different values and cultural experiences of the constituents of the organization. So if we're working, we both Gary and I had worked with youth and providing mentoring programs, which the mentors are largely white executives in business or somewhere else in the community. And urban youth are not growing up in homes led by white executives. And so they're very different experiences. And wonder if you talked at all about or looked at all about the differences in values there and reconciling those in some way, shape, or form, so that those people that continue to volunteer and their families continue to be served, or whoever it may be. Now I'll go on mute now.
There's an interesting thing about that. So most of the national organizations also have independently operated nonprofits that deliver their program in their local markets. So those typically, but not always, mirror the constituency that they serve. I mean, it's not a 100% reflection, but they tend to be more diverse in the communities that they serve. So that's an input, and the ones that do that and do that well say that that's beneficial to really understanding what's happening in society and how the organization can help them. But the challenge is, what do you do with that information if you're Boy Scout council leader in New York City and you encounter these changes and the organizational culture doesn't allow you to surface it and engage with it and have a meaningful conversation? So consider big brothers and big sisters who back in December hired my friend Artis Stevens as their first Black CEO in their 116 years history. First one. And when you look at the mentees that they serve, they're predominantly Black and brown people. And the mentors in their organization throughout the organization are predominantly white people. So you look at their board, and while there's some diversity, it's not great. So how are we imparting society's values on generations of mentees because we're not necessarily culturally relevant? We don't mirror what's happening in society, and therefore we're creating different values and holding youth to these different values in the mentoring arrangement. So we have all sorts of problems that stem from that.
Thanks. And we have time for one more question, and then we'll be wrapping up. I'd like you to, in the chat, to go ahead and we'll do a chatter fall, which means as a technique, for those of you that don't know it, it's type in an answer to my question, but don't hit enter. And then we'll give it as a parting gift to David, which is, what is your takeaway from today, a reflection or a question from today? So it's not a great job, David. It's more like, how are you different? What are you reflecting on? What can you use? What's something you might do? What's a question that is next? So just give a little bit of feedback to David in terms of reflecting on the experience today. So with that, anybody have one final question they want to ask?
I had a question.
Sure.
It was sort of a statement and a question based on just the last thing that you said, David, about big brothers and big sisters. And the small group I was in, one of the final statement was the mission of the nonprofit sort of has a lot to do with the type of complexities you find in that nonprofit. So I was having a hard time generalizing across nonprofits. As a matter of fact, one of the lens that I put on was the two organizations you named were the NAACP and the Urban League. And even as you talked, I just kept having this yes, but the mission, and I agree, the mission hasn't really changed for those organizations, but certainly the way that they work and young people bring that. But the point I was just going to make, it's just really hard to make general. I mean, there are some common things, and I particularly like your history, but it's just yet to be so complex when you look at a particular, even within a state. I work with the nonprofits in Delaware. When you go into that one state, the culture is so different than if I were in Florida. So I can appreciate how useful your research is going to be and how much it takes to interpret it.
Thank you. I'm hopeful that at the very least it raises, it encourages leaders to think about how their culture impacts their decision making and how their culture shapes those that they serve. And you're right, there's no cookie cutter answer to any of them, but there are some common themes that I found through all of them that the bigger ones need to address, I think.
Well, thank you, David. So as we get ready to leave, hit enter, and let's share with David some of our thoughts, reactions, and takeaways. Let's go ahead and hit enter. And I want to offer, as we look through this, the people want to read more. So you have articles, you have things that people can read, that people can go to your website, davidharkins.com. They can see what you're printing and what you're publishing and your ideas and your blogs and Medium, the platform you're publishing in and stuff like that, which is really good. And just a lot of nice comments and appreciations and what people are considering and things like that. I think my biggest takeaway is what I think Francis talked about, which is really this interpretation, of what you have stated can change over time. And it's listening to that. So anyway, everybody have a great rest of the day. David, high five. Boop. I appreciate all that you're doing. And Doug, who's up next in our queue?
So in May, we are welcoming Juliet Scott from the Tavistock Institute, who will be talking about how she uses arts to support the becoming of new knowledge and practice within the Tavistock Institute. So that'll be an exciting talk. Then we have Matt, and I never quite say his name right. The last name is Menahan, okay, who will be talking around how to help people live into their purpose. And that's June. And then July, we have Dr. Sandra Faulkner from BGSU, who will be talking about poetic inquiry as a method of research. So those are the next 3 months worth, and then more to come.
And Doug will be at the end of that one, will be providing his own poetic reflection on her talk that day.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. David, again, high five. Really appreciate all that you're doing. And everybody have a great rest of your day. Bye for now.